Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey back in time to an era that completely reshaped the world of art, the Renaissance. Spanning roughly from the 14th to the 17th century, this wasn't just a rebirth of classical ideas, it was a revolution in how we see and represent the world around us. So, what exactly makes a Renaissance painting? A Renaissance painting? Let's dive in and explore the key characteristics that define this incredible period. Before the Renaissance, medieval art, often called Gothic art, was the dominant style. Think of those beautiful but flat, two-dimensional religious icons. The figures were often stylized, elongated, and existed in a heavenly, golden space rather than a realistic one. The primary goal wasn't to replicate reality but to convey a spiritual message. The scale of figures was often based on their religious importance, not their position in space. So, a saint might be much larger than a regular person, even if they were standing right next to them. But as the 14th century dawned in Italy, something began to change. Artists and thinkers started looking back to the art and philosophy of ancient Greece and Rome, and this sparked a new way of thinking known as humanism. Humanism is arguably the single most important concept to understand when we talk about the Renaissance. It was a philosophical shift that placed new emphasis on human beings, our potential, our achievements, and our place in the world. Instead of focusing solely on the divine and the afterlife, Renaissance thinkers celebrated human intellect, creativity, and the beauty of the natural world. This had a profound impact on art. Artists were no longer just anonymous craftsmen serving the church. They became celebrated individuals, geniuses in their own right. Their goal shifted from creating purely symbolic images to capturing the world as they actually saw it, with all its human drama, emotion, and physical reality. This new focus on realism led to one of the most significant breakthroughs in art history: the development of linear perspective. Imagine you're standing on a long, straight road. As you look into the distance, the sides of the road appear to get closer and closer until they meet at a single point on the horizon. That's the basic idea behind linear perspective. The architect Filippo Brunelleschi is credited with formalizing this system around 1413. Artists used mathematical principles to create a believable illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface, like a canvas or a wall. This was revolutionary. For the first time, painted scenes had a real depth. You could feel like you could walk right into the painting. A fantastic example is Masaccio's Holy Trinity fresco. It's one of the earliest paintings to use perfect linear perspective, and it creates such a convincing architectural space that it feels like a real chapel carved into the wall. This technique became a cornerstone of Renaissance painting, but creating a sense of depth wasn't just about lines converging on the horizon. Renaissance artists also mastered what we call sfumato. It's an Italian word that literally means smote or vanished. This technique, most famously perfected by Leonardo da Vinci, involves using soft, hazy transitions between colors and tones, especially around the edges of figures. Look closely at the Mona Lisa. Notice how the corners of her mouth and eyes seem to blend into shadow. There are no harsh outlines. This creates a sense of ambiguity and lifelike subtlety. Sfumato makes figures appear more three-dimensional and helps them blend more naturally with their background, adding to the overall realism and atmospheric quality of the painting. Along with sfumato, another crucial technique for creating realism was chiaro. This is an Italian term that means light-dark. It refers to the use of strong contrasts between light and shadow to model three-dimensional forms. Think about how a bright light hitting one side of a sphere leaves the other side in shadow. Renaissance artists used this principle to give their figures a sense of volume and mass. They weren't flat symbols anymore. They were solid, tangible bodies occupying space. Caravaggio, a later Renaissance master, took chiaroscuro to an extreme, using dramatic theatrical lighting to heighten the emotional intensity of his scenes. This powerful use of light and shadow could direct the viewer's eye, create drama, and reveal the psychological state of the figures. This brings us to the figures themselves. Fueled by the spirit of humanism, Renaissance artists became obsessed with accurately portraying the human body. They studied anatomy, sometimes even through dissecting human corpses, which was a controversial practice at the time. They wanted to understand how muscles worked, how bones were structured, and how the body moved. Look at Michelangelo's David Doris paintings on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. The figures are powerful, dynamic, and incredibly lifelike. They possess a physical and psychological presence that was completely new. Artists moved away from the stiff, formal poses of medieval art to contrapposto, a more natural, relaxed stance, where the figure's weight is shifted onto one leg, creating a gentle S-curve in the body. This pose, borrowed from classical sculpture, made figures look less like statues and more like living, breathing people. The subject matter of paintings also broadened significantly. While religious themes remained incredibly important, the church was still a major patron of the arts. Artists began to explore new subjects. Mythology from ancient Greece and Rome made a huge comeback. Botticelli's The Birth of Venus is a perfect example, celebrating a pagan goddess with a beauty and grace that was a hallmark of the Florentine Renaissance. We also see the rise of portraiture. Wealthy merchants, dukes, and popes wanted to be immortalized. These portraits weren't just symbolic representations. They were attempts to capture the individual's likeness and, more importantly, their personality and inner character. Their work, Leonardo's Mona Lisa, is the ultimate example of this psychological depth. Let's not forget about the composition of these masterpieces. Renaissance artists were masters of creating balanced and harmonious compositions. They often arranged figures in a stable, triangular, or pyramidal shape. Think of Leonardo S. The Last Supper or Raphael. Many paintings of the Madonna and Child. The main figures form a clear, solid pyramid, which gives the scene a sense of order, stability, and grace. This careful organization of elements on the canvas wasn't just for looks. It helped to guide the viewer's eye and create a feeling of classical calm and perfection, even when depicting dramatic events. Everything had its place, contributing to a unified and coherent whole. Finally, the emotional content of Renaissance art was a world away from the serene detachment of the medieval period. Because of humanism's focus on an individual experience, artists strove to depict a full range of human emotions: joy, sorrow, anger, surprise. Giotto, an early pioneer, was one of the first to break away from the Byzantine style by giving his figures real, relatable feelings. In his frescoes, you can see the palpable grief of the mourners around Christ. By the High Renaissance, artists like Leonardo were masters of capturing subtle psychological states. The apostles in the Last Supper aren't just a row of saints. They are 12 individuals reacting with shock, disbelief, and horror to the news of a betrayal. This emotional realism is what makes these paintings so powerful and timeless. They speak directly to our own human experience. So, to sum it all up, when you look at a Renaissance painting, you're seeing a powerful combination of ideas and techniques. You're seeing the intellectual spirit of humanism, the mathematical precision of linear perspective, the the subtle modeling of sfumato and chiaro, and a deep understanding of human anatomy. You're seeing balanced compositions, a wider range of subject matter, and a profound emotional depth. From the groundbreaking work of Giotto and Masato to the high Renaissance masters like Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael. These characteristics came together to create an art form that was realistic, human-centric, and utterly beautiful. It laid the foundation for Western art for centuries to come and continues to inspire us today. Perspective in Renaissance art. Forget what you think you know about dusty old paintings. We're going to uncover how a bunch of rebellious artists completely changed the way we see the world. Literally. So, what exactly was the Renaissance? Spanning roughly from the 14th to the 17th century. It was a rebirth of art, science, and culture that swept across Europe after the medieval period, which was heavily focused on the divine and the afterlife. People started looking around and saying, hey, the world we live in is pretty incredible too. This new way of thinking, called humanism, placed a fresh emphasis on human potential, experience, and our place in the natural world. Before the Renaissance, if you looked at a medieval painting, things might seem a bit flat. Figures were often sized based on their religious importance, not their position in space. A saint might be a giant standing next to a tiny king, and buildings could look like they were about to topple over. The art was symbolic, meant to tell a heavenly story, not to replicate reality. It was beautiful in its own right, but the Renaissance artists were hungry for something different. They wanted to create a window onto another world, a world that looked so real you could almost step right into it, and the secret weapon they discovered to achieve this: linear perspective. This was the game changer. Imagine standing on a long, straight road. The sides of the road seem to get closer and closer until they meet at a single point on the horizon, right? That's the vanishing point. An architect and genius named Filippo Brunelleschi is credited with formalizing this system in the early 1400s in Florence. He figured out that by using a grid of imaginary lines, all converging on that one vanishing point, artists could create a convincing illusion of three-dimensional depth on a two-dimensional surface. Suddenly, paintings were no longer just flat arrangements of symbols. They became stages. Artists could now control space. They could place figures in the foreground, middle ground, and background, making them appear closer or farther away with mathematical precision. Luca C. Masaccios. Holy Trinity fresco. It's one of the earliest and most stunning examples. When you stand in front of it, the painted chapel looks like a real, recessed space carved into the wall. It's an architectural illusion, and for people in the 1420s, this was pure magic. It was like the first 3D movie, but it wasn't just about straight lines. Renaissance masters also perfected other techniques to enhance this illusion of realism. One is atmospheric perspective. Have you ever noticed how distant mountains look paler, bluer, and less detailed than the hills right in front of you? That's because of the atmosphere between you and the object. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci became masters of this. In the Mona Lisa, look behind her. The landscape recedes into a hazy, bluish distance. This technique doesn't just create depth. It adds mood, mystery, and a sense of vast, open space. And let's not forget chiaroscuro, the dramatic use of light and shadow. The word literally means light dark in Italian. Instead of coloring everything evenly, artists like Caravaggio would use a single, strong light source to illuminate their subjects, plunging the rest of the scene into deep shadow. This created a powerful sense of volume and drama. It made figures look solid, as if they were carved from stone, and it focused the viewer's attention exactly where the artist wanted it. This wasn't just about making things look real. It was about making them feel emotionally powerful. One of the most iconic paintings that brings all of this together is Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. Forget the flat, crowded table scenes of the past. Leonardo uses perfect linear perspective. All the architectural lines of the room point directly to the central figure of Christ, making him the undeniable focal point. The apostles aren't just lined up, they're arranged in dynamic, overlapping groups, creating a sense of chaotic human emotion. He uses light to model their faces and bodies, giving them weight and presence. It's a masterclass in using perspective, not just for realism, but for powerful storytelling. Another incredible example is Raphael's The School of Athens. This painting is a celebration of humanism and perspective. It depicts a grand hall filled with the greatest philosophers and thinkers of antiquity. The floor tiles create a perfect grid, leading our eyes deep into the scene toward the central figures of Plato and Aristotle. Raphael doesn't just show us a room full of people, he creates an entire intellectual world. Each figure is placed deliberately, creating conversations and relationships within a perfectly constructed three-dimensional space. You feel like you could walk among them and join the debate. So, why does all this matter? Because the invention of perspective during the Renaissance fundamentally changed our relationship with art. It empowered the artist, turning them from a simple craftsman into a master creator, an architect of worlds, and for the viewer, it created a more personal, immersive experience. You were no longer just looking at a story. You were looking through a window into another reality. This obsession with realism and the human experience laid the groundwork for centuries of Western art. From the dramatic lighting of the Baroque period to the realism of the 19th century, and even the way we frame shots in movies and video games. Today, it all has roots in the discoveries made by these Renaissance pioneers. They taught us how to see the world in 3 dimensions and how to capture that vision for everyone to share. The Renaissance wasn't just a rebirth of old ideas. It was the birth of a new way of seeing. By mastering perspective, artists didn't just learn to copy the world. They learned to understand it, organize it, and present it in a way that was more logical, more human, and more breathtaking than ever before. The use of light and shadow. Have you ever looked at a painting and felt like you could step right into it? Ever wondered how artists make figures look so solid, so real, so full of life and drama, almost like they're about to speak? A huge part of that magic comes from a revolutionary technique that truly came into its own during the Renaissance: the artful use of light and shadow. This technique has a fancy Italian name, chiaroscuro. It literally translates to light dark, but it's so much more than just putting light colors next to dark colors. It's about sculpting with light, using it to carve out forms, create depth, and direct the viewer's eye. Before the Renaissance, many paintings, especially from the medieval period, looked quite flat. Figures were often outlined, and color was filled in, but they lacked that sense of three-dimensional weight. The Renaissance changed everything. Artists became obsessed with observing the natural world, and that included studying how light falls on objects, how it creates highlights, and how it casts shadows. Let's rewind to the early pioneers. Artists like Giotto, working at the very beginning of the 14th century, started to experiment. If you look at his frescoes, you can see he's trying to give his figures volume. Yes, adding darker tones to the folds of their robes to suggest they were not just flat shapes. It was a groundbreaking step, a move away from the symbolic flat art of the Middle Ages towards a more realistic representation of the world. He was planting the seeds of chiaroscuro, but it was in the High Renaissance, during the 15th and 16th centuries, that the technique truly blossomed. And who's the master of masters when we talk about this? None other than Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was more than an artist. He was a scientist. He spent countless hours dissecting, observing, and sketching, all to understand anatomy and the physics of light. He developed a specific style of chiaroscuro called sfumato, which means smoked in Italian. Instead of sharp, dramatic contrasts, Leonardo used soft, hazy transitions between light and shadow. Think of the Mona Lisa. Look at the corners of her eyes and her famous smile. There are no hard lines. The shadows blend so seamlessly into the light that it creates an incredible sense of realism and mystery. It's this gentle sfumato that makes her features look so soft and lifelike, as if she's a real person breathing in the room with us. His Virgin of the Rocks is another master class. In this, the figures emerge from a dark, mysterious cave, their forms defined by a soft, glowing light. It's not just about making them look 3D. It's about creating an atmosphere, a mood of divine intimacy and wonder. Now, let's turn up the drama. If Leonardo's chiaroscuro is a gentle haze, then Caravaggio's is a theatrical spotlight in a pitch-black room. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, working in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, took chiaroscuro and cranked it up to 11. He developed a style called tenebrism, from the Italian word tenebroso, which means dark or gloomy. Caravaggio wasn't afraid of the dark. In fact, he embraced it. His paintings often feature intense, dramatic contrasts. A single, powerful light source, often from an unseen spot just outside the painting, illuminates the scene, throwing everything else into deep, impenetrable shadow. Look at his masterpiece, The Calling of St. Matthew. Christ, almost hidden in shadow, points towards Matthew. The tax collector, a brilliant beam of light, follows his gesture, cutting across the dark room and illuminating Matthew's face. It's a moment of divine intervention, made incredibly dramatic and immediate through light. The light isn't just for modeling. It's a key part of the story. It symbolizes the divine call, literally shining a light on the chosen one. Caravaggio's use of tenebrism makes his religious scenes feel raw, gritty, and intensely human. His saints aren't ethereal beings floating on clouds. They are common people in dark taverns, caught in a moment of profound spiritual significance. This dramatic lighting made his work feel incredibly modern and had a massive impact on the artists who followed, starting the whole Baroque movement. Other Renaissance giants also harnessed the power of chiaroscuro in their own unique ways. Think of Raphael. While known for his harmony and grace, he used chiaroscuro to give his figures a gentle, idealized volume. His Madonnas have a soft, sculptural quality. Their rounded forms lovingly rendered with subtle shifts in light and shade. In Venice, artists like Titian and Tintoretto explored the expressive potential of light. Titian used light and shadow to create rich textures, the gleam of silk, the softness of skin, the glint of armor. His use of color and light created a sensual, vibrant world. Tintoretto, on the other hand, used flickering, dramatic light to create dynamic, energy-filled compositions, almost like cinematic snapshots of biblical events. So, why was this so important? The development of chiaroscuro was part of a larger cultural shift. The Renaissance was all about humanism, a focus on human potential and the individual's experience of the world. By making figures look more realistic and three-dimensional, artists were making them more relatable. They were bringing divine stories down to earth and elevating human subjects to the level of high. Art chiaroscuro allowed artists to control the emotional temperature of a painting. A soft, gentle light could create a feeling of peace and serenity. A harsh, dramatic light could create tension, drama, and suspense. It became one of the most powerful tools in an artist's toolkit for storytelling. The legacy of Renaissance chiaroscuro is immense. It didn't end in the 17th century. Artists like Rembrandt in the Dutch Golden Age became masters of using light to explore the human soul. Later, Romantic painters used it for dramatic effect, and you can even see its principles at work in modern photography and filmmaking. Every time a filmmaker uses a spotlight to focus your attention or creates a moody scene with deep shadows, they are using the language of chiaroscuro that was perfected by the masters of the Renaissance. So, the next time you visit a museum and stand before a painting by Leonardo, Caravaggio, or Raphael, take a moment. Don't just look at what's in the light. Pay attention to the shadows. See how the artist uses them to guide your eye, to build a form, and to tell a story. You'll find a whole new layer of genius and intention hidden in the dark. It's a beautiful reminder that in art, as in life, the shadows are just as important as the light. Religious painting in the Renaissance. Specifically, we're going to explore a theme that dominated the art world for centuries. Religious painting from the 14th to the 17th century. The vast majority of arts produced in Europe was commissioned by the church or wealthy patrons who wanted to express their piety. But this wasn't just about decorating churches. It was a revolution in how humanity perceived the divine. So, what changed? Before the Renaissance, in the medieval period, religious art was often very stylized, and to think of those Gothic paintings with flat, golden backgrounds and figures that looked more like symbols than real people. The primary goal was to convey a theological message, not to replicate reality. But as the Renaissance dawned in Italy, a new way of thinking emerged, one that celebrated humanism. This philosophy didn't reject religion. Instead, it placed a new emphasis on human experience, intellect, and the beauty of the natural world. Artists began to ask, what if we could depict biblical figures not as distant, ethereal beings, but as real, relatable people with genuine emotions? This shift is what makes Renaissance religious art so powerful. Artists started to incorporate groundbreaking techniques to achieve a new level of realism. One of the most significant was the development of linear perspective, famously mastered by architects like Brunelleschi and artists like Suddenly, paintings were no longer flat. They became windows into a three-dimensional world with a sense of depth and space that made the scenes feel tangible. You could almost step into the painting. In Masaccio's masterpiece, The Holy Trinity, created around 1427, we see one of the earliest and most perfect examples. The figures are placed within a convincing architectural space, making the divine scene feel grounded in our own reality. Another key innovation was the study of human anatomy. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo weren't just painters. They were scientists. They dissected human bodies to understand the intricate workings of muscles and bones. This anatomical knowledge allowed them to portray figures with incredible accuracy and naturalism. Look at Michelangelo's depiction of Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. He's not just a symbol. He is a living, breathing man of flesh and bone, full of potential energy, about to receive the spark of life from God. The emotion and physicality are palpable. This focus on realistic human forms made the sacred stories more accessible and emotionally resonant for the viewer. And let's talk about emotion. Renaissance artists became masters of capturing the human psyche. Think of Leonardo's The Last Supper. This isn't just a static depiction of 13 men at a table. It's a moment of high drama. Leonardo chose the exact instant after Jesus announces that one of his disciples will betray him. Each apostle reacts differently. Shock, disbelief, anger, confusion. You can read their individual personalities and emotions on their faces and in their body language. The psychological depth is astonishing. It draws you in and makes you a witness to this pivotal, heart-wrenching moment. Light and shadow also played a starring role. Artists moved away from the flat, uniformed light of medieval art and embraced chiaroscuro, the dramatic use of light and dark. This technique could be used to model figures, giving them a sense of volume and tridimension, but more than that, it was used for symbolic and dramatic effect. Caravaggio, a master of the late Renaissance or Baroque period, took this to an extreme. In his painting, The Calling of Saint Matthew, a beam of divine light cuts through a dark, dingy room, illuminating Matthew's face at the very moment Christ calls him. The light isn't just for illumination. It's a physical manifestation of the divine call, a moment of spiritual awakening. The materials themselves also evolved. The transition from tempera paint, which dried quickly and created a matte finish, to oil paint was a game changer. Pioneered by Northern European artists like Jan van Eyck and later adopted enthusiastically in Venice, oil paint allowed for richer colors, smoother transitions, and a greater level of detail. It dries slowly, giving artists more time to work, blend, and create subtle effects of light and texture. Titian, a master of the Venetian school, used oil paints to create works of incredible luminosity and emotional warmth. His religious scenes are known for their vibrant colors and soft atmospheric light, which adds to their spiritual and sensual appeal. As the Renaissance spread from Italy to Northern Europe, artists in places like Flanders and Germany developed their own unique style of religious painting. While they also embraced realism, they often focused on intricate details and complex symbolism. Think of Jan van Eyck's Ghent altarpiece. Every single element in this massive work is rendered with microscopic precision, from the jewels on a crown to the individual plants in the landscape, and everything is loaded with meaning. This art invited viewers to look closely and meditate on the layers of theological symbolism hidden within the everyday details. But the story doesn't end there. The Renaissance was also a time of religious upheaval. The Protestant Reformation in the 16th century had a profound impact on art. In many Protestant regions, religious imagery was seen as a form of idolatry and was discouraged or even destroyed. This led to a rise in secular art forms like portraiture, landscapes, and genre scenes. In contrast, the Catholic Church responded with the Counter-Reformation, doubling down on the power of art to inspire faith and piety. Art became a tool of persuasion designed to be dramatic, emotional, and awe-inspiring, leading directly into the theatricality of the Baroque period. So, when we look at religious paintings from the Renaissance, we're seeing more than just beautiful pictures. We're witnessing a pivotal moment in history where art, science, and faith collided. These artists weren't just illustrating stories. They were exploring what it means to be human and what it means to connect with the divine. They brought the sacred down to earth, making it personal emotional, and deeply relatable, creating a visual language that continues to move and inspire us hundreds of years later. Mythological themes in Renaissance art spanning from the 14th to the 17th century. This era was a dazzling rebirth of art, science, and culture, pulling Europe out of the Middle Ages and into the modern world. But what really made this period's art so groundbreaking and, honestly, so breathtaking? A huge part of the answer lies in its passionate love affair with the ancient world, especially the epic tales of Greek and Roman mythology. So, let's set the stage. The word Renaissance literally means rebirth in French. And what was being reborn? It was a profound interest in the classical antiquity of Greece and Rome. After centuries where art was almost exclusively dominated by religious themes, artists and thinkers began to look back. They unearthed ancient texts, marveled at rediscovered sculptures, and became utterly fascinated by the human-centered worldview of the classical past. This wasn't about rejecting religion, but about expanding the human experience and celebrating human potential, intellect, and beauty. This shift in thinking is known as humanism. Humanists believed in the power of human reason and the importance of a well-rounded education in subjects like grammar, history, poetry, and philosophy, and this philosophy had a massive impact on art. Suddenly, the gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus, the heroes of epic poems, and the dramatic narratives of myth became fair game for the artist S. Canvas and the sculptor S. Chisel. These stories were not just entertaining. They were seen as powerful allegories packed with moral lessons and profound insights into human nature. So, why mythology? Why were patrons and artists so obsessed with these ancient stories? For one, they provided a fantastic vehicle for exploring complex human emotions and universal themes. Love, jealousy, war, tragedy, triumph. The myths had it all. Unlike the often rigid and formulaic depictions in medieval religious art, mythological subjects allowed for dynamic compositions, dramatic action, and a much greater focus on the human form, often in its idealized, nude state. This was a radical departure, and it allowed artists to showcase their incredible skill in anatomy, perspective, and capturing movement. Let's look at some iconic examples. You can't talk about Renaissance mythology without mentioning Sandro Botticelli. His masterpiece, The Birth of Venus, created around 1486, is the quintessential example. Here we see Venus, the Roman goddess of love, emerging from the sea on a giant seashell, a vision of pure classical beauty. This wasn't a scene from the Bible. It was a scene from a poem by a classical writer. Botticelli revived the monumental female nude, a subject that had been virtually taboo for 1,000 years. The painting is a celebration of beauty and love, both physical and divine, a perfect blend of pagan myth and Renaissance Neoplatonic philosophy. And just a few years earlier, Botticelli painted Primavera, or Spring. This is another mythological fantasy, a complex allegory set in a lush citrus grove. It features a cast of characters including Venus, Cupid, the three Graces, and Mercury. Each figure, each gesture is loaded with symbolic meaning, drawing from classical literature to create a poem in paint. It's a testament to the intellectual and artistic ambitions of the time, commissioned by the powerful Medici family of Florence, who were huge proponents of this new wave of classical learning. Moving into the High Renaissance, we see mythology being used to create works of incredible power and drama. Take Titian, the master of the Venetian school. His series of large-scale mythological paintings which he called poesi, or painted poems, are legendary. Works like Bacchus and Ariadne are bursting with life, color, and emotion. You can feel the surprise in motion as Bacchus and his wild entourage discover the abandoned Ariadne. Titian's use of rich colors and dynamic brushwork brings the chaotic energy of the myth to life in a way that feels immediate and visceral. His Rape of Europa is another masterpiece of drama. It depicts the moment Jupiter, disguised as a beautiful white bull, abducts the Princess Europa. The swirling sea, the dramatic sky, and Europa's twisting form, a mix of fear and perhaps even wonder, create a scene of intense psychological complexity. Titian wasn't just illustrating a story. He was exploring themes of desire, power, and transformation, using the ancient myth as his stage. And of course, we have to talk about sculpture. Who can forget Michelangelo's Bacchus, carved when he was just in his early 20s? It depicts the Roman god of wine in a slightly unsteady, tipsy pose. It's a brilliant study of youth and intoxication, a far cry from the serene, divine figures often seen in religious art. It shows a deep understanding of both human anatomy and the character of the god himself, demonstrating how mythology allowed for a more naturalistic and human portrayal of even divine beings. Even Raphael, known for his serene Madonnas, delved into mythology. His frescoes at the Villa Farnesina in Rome, like the Triumph of Galatea, are a joyous celebration of classical antiquity. Galatea rides a shell chariot pulled by dolphins, surrounded by sea creatures and cherubs. It's a vision of perfect harmony and beauty, inspired by ancient poetry and showcasing Raphael's mastery of composition and form. The work perfectly captures the optimistic, life-affirming spirit of the High Renaissance. So, as we can see, the rediscovery of mythology did something incredible for art. It provided artists with a whole new library of powerful stories. It gave them the freedom to explore the human body, human emotion, and complex allegorical ideas in ways that hadn't been possible before. It allowed them to demonstrate their classical education and connect with the intellectual currents of their time. These paintings weren't just decorations. They were conversation starters, intellectual puzzles, and profound statements about the world and humanity's place in it. The influence of these works is impossible to overstate. The themes, compositions, and the celebration of the human form pioneered by Renaissance artists in their mythological works would echo through the centuries, influencing Baroque, neoclassical, and even modern art. They set a new standard for what art could be and what it could achieve. So the next time you in a museum and you see a painting of a Greek god or a scene from Ovid's Metamorphoses, remember the context. You're not just looking at an old story. You're looking at a revolution. You're seeing the moment when artists broke free from medieval constraints and embraced a worldview that celebrated humanity in all its flawed, beautiful, and heroic glory. It was the rebirth of art, and it was absolutely magnificent. Ever looked at an old portrait and felt like the person was staring right back at you across hundreds of years? That feeling, that spark of life, was perfected during one of the most explosive periods of creativity in human history, the Renaissance. Tonight, we're diving deep into the world of Renaissance portrait painting, an art form that didn't just capture a face, but captured the very soul of a new era. So, what changed? Before the Renaissance, in the medieval period, portraits were often stiff, symbolic, and not very realistic. They were more about representing a person, statissa, king is a king, A saint is a saint, then showing who they really were. But then, starting in the 14th century, something incredible began to happen in Italy. A new way of thinking called humanism emerged. Humanists celebrated the individual, human potential, and the beauty of the natural world. This wasn't about rejecting religion. It was about seeing the divine asterisk in asterisk humanity. And this philosophy completely transformed art. Artists were no longer just craftsmen. They became intellectuals, scientists, and storytellers. They began studying human anatomy, dissecting bodies to understand how muscles worked under the skin. They rediscovered the principles of perspective from ancient Greece and Rome, learning how to create the illusion of three-dimensional space on a flat surface. This was revolutionary. Suddenly, paintings had depth. Figures felt solid, like you could walk around them. Let's look at the early Renaissance, primarily in Florence. Artists like Sandro Botticelli began to paint portraits that were incredibly graceful and linear. Think of his portrait of a young woman. There's a delicate beauty, an elegance in the lines of her neck and hair. But there's also a new sense of personality. It's not just an icon. It's a specific person with a specific mood, a sense of gentle melancholy. This was a huge step forward, portraying inner emotion. Then we move into the High Renaissance, the age of giants. And you can't talk about High Renaissance portraits without talking about Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was obsessed with capturing what he called the motions of the mind. He believed a painter's job was to show a person's thoughts and intentions through their expression and gestures. And the ultimate example of this, of course, is the Mona Lisa. Why is the Mona Lisa so famous? It's not just the masterful technique, the soft, smoky blending of colors called sfumato that makes the edges seem to melt away. It's her expression, that famously ambiguous smile. Is she happy? Is she sad? Is she hiding a secret? Leonardo captured a fleeting moment of human consciousness, a psychological depth that no one had ever achieved before. He made her feel alive, like she's a real person interacting with us, the viewer. This set a new standard for portraiture. It was no longer enough to paint what a person looked like. You had to paint who they were asterisk. Another giant of this era was Raphael. His portraits are known for their clarity, grace, and perfect composition. Take his portrait of Baldassare Castiglione, a famous writer and diplomat. Look at the calm dignity in his face, the rich but understated clothing, and the direct, intelligent gaze. Raphael presents him as the ideal Renaissance gentleman, poised, cultured, and self-assured. Unlike the mystery of the Mona Lisa, Raphael gives us a sense of serene confidence and social harmony. His portraits feel perfectly balanced and incredibly human. While Italy was the epicenter, the Renaissance was happening all over Europe. In Northern Europe, in places like Flanders and Germany, artists took a slightly different approach. They were masters of detail. Northern Renaissance painters like Jan van Eyck and Albrecht Dürer used oil paint to render textures with breathtaking realism. You can almost feel the velvet of a robe, the fur on a collar, or the glint of light on a jewel. Let's look at Van Eyck's Arnolfini portrait. It's a double portrait, and every single object in the room is packed with symbolism. The single lit candle, the discarded shoes, the dog day, all tell a story. But beyond the symbolism, look at the faces. There's an incredible precision and honesty. There's no attempt to idealize them. He paints them exactly as they are, with a kind of solemn gravity. Then there's Albrecht Dürer, who essentially invented the artist's self-portrait. As a major genre, he painted himself multiple times throughout his life, documenting his own aging process and evolving. His self-portrait from the year 1500 is astonishing. He presents himself frontally in a pose traditionally reserved for Christ. It's a bold, almost shocking statement about the divine creative power of the artist. He's not just a painter, he's a creator. As we move into the late Renaissance or Mannerism and into the Venetian school, we see even more. The Venetian artist Titian became one of the most sought-after portraitists in Europe. His work is all about color, light, and a powerful, painterly brute. He could capture the authority of a pope or the sensuality of a beautiful woman with equal skill. His portraits are less about precise lines and more about conveying mood and status through rich colors and dramatic lighting. His portrait of a man, often called the man with the blue sleeve, shows a young man with an air of aristocratic arrogance and confidence, conveyed almost entirely through his pose and the rich blue of his sleeve. So, what is the legacy of Renaissance portraiture? It's huge. These artists taught us that a portrait is more than a likeness. It's a psychological document. It's a social statement. It's a moment of human connection frozen in time. They established the individual as a worthy subject of art and gave us a window into the minds of people who lived 500 years ago. Every time a modern artist tries to capture a person's character on canvas, they are following in the footsteps of Leonardo, Raphael, Dürer, and Titian. They didn't just paint faces. They painted humanity itself. The difference between Renaissance and Gothic art. The word itself means rebirth, and from the 14th to the 17th century, Europe experienced an explosion of creativity, innovation, and a fundamental shift in how people saw the world and their place in it. But to truly understand just how radical this change was, we need to look at what came before it. For centuries, the dominant artistic style was Gothic, a style you probably associate with towering cathedrals, pointed arches, and a certain divine, otherworldly feeling. So, what exactly happened? Why did art move from the spiritual, almost ethereal figures of the Gothic era to the lifelike, human-focused masterpieces of the Renaissance? That's the question we're going to answer tonight. We'll explore the key differences between these two incredible artistic movements, looking at everything from their core philosophies to their techniques and subject matter. It's a story of how humanity rediscovered itself, and it's all written in stone and on canvas. Let's dive in. Before we get to the Renaissance, let's set the stage with the Gothic period, which flourished in the High and Late Middle Ages, roughly from the 12th century up to the 15th. When you think of Gothic art, the first thing that probably comes to mind is architecture. Imagine the great cathedrals of Europe, like Notre Dame in Paris or Cologne Cathedral in Germany. They are designed to make you feel small, to draw your eyes upward towards the heavens. This was intentional. The entire philosophy of the Gothic era was theocentric, meaning God was at the center of everything. Life on earth was seen as a temporary, often difficult, stop on the way to the afterlife. This philosophy is reflected directly in the art. Look at a typical Gothic sculpture or painting. The figures are often elongated, stylized, and not very realistic. Their bodies are hidden under heavy drapery, and their faces carry solemn, pious expressions. The goal wasn't to create perfect, lifelike portrait of a person. Instead, the artist's job was to convey a spiritual message or a biblical story. The figures were symbols, representations of holy concepts not flesh and blood individuals. Gold backgrounds were common in paintings, removing the scene from any earthly setting and placing it in a divine, heavenly realm. The focus was on the sacred, the divine, and the eternal. The human experience, with all its mechanisms and emotion, was secondary. Then, starting in the 14th century in Italy, something began to change. Scholars started rediscovering the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome. They read the works of philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, who celebrated human reason, potential, and the beauty of the natural world. This sparked a new philosophy that we now call humanism. Humanism didn't reject God, but it did shift the focus. It proposed that human beings were magnificent creations, capable of great things right here on earth. This life wasn't just a waiting room for the next, it was something to be experienced, understood, and celebrated. This single philosophical shift is the engine that drives the entire Renaissance. It's the why behind every artistic change we're about to discuss. Artists were no longer just craftsmen serving the church. They became intellectuals, innovators, and observers of the human condition. They started to see the world not just as a reflection of the divine, but as a fascinating subject in its own right. They began to believe that by accurately capturing the beauty of the human form and the natural world, they were, in their own way, honoring the genius of the divine creator. This new confidence in human potential unleashed a wave of creativity that would completely redefine Western art. So, how did this new humanist philosophy change the art itself? Let's start with the subject matter. While religious scenes were still incredibly popular, the church was still a major patron. After all, the way they were depicted changed dramatically. Take a Gothic painting of the Madonna and Child. Mary often appears as a remote, queenly figure, enthroned in heaven. Now, look at a Renaissance version, like one of Raphael's. Mary looks like a real, tender, young mother. The baby Jesus looks like an actual baby, chubby and curious. They are still holy figures, but they are portrayed with a warmth and humanity that makes them relatable. They inhabit a recognizable earthly space, often with a realistic landscape stretching out behind them. Furthermore, new subjects became popular. The individual portrait, which was very rare in the Middle Ages, became a major genre. Wealthy patrons wanted to be immortalized, not as generic symbols of piety, but as the powerful, intelligent, and unique individuals they were. Think of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. We're still captivated by her because she feels like a real person with a complex inner life. Mythology from ancient Greece and Rome also made a huge comeback. Artists like Botticelli painted scenes from classical myths, celebrating beauty, love, and human drama in works like The Birth of Venus. This would have been almost unthinkable in the Gothic era, where the focus was exclusively on Christian narratives. To achieve this new level of realism, Renaissance artists had to become masters of technique. They were scientists as much as they were artists. One of the most significant breakthroughs was the development of linear perspective, perfected by the architect Filippo. This was a mathematical system for creating a believable illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. It allowed artists to create paintings that looked like windows into another world, with buildings receding into the distance and figures occupying a coherent, logical space. This was a stark contrast to the flat, floating worlds of Gothic art. Artists also became obsessed with anatomy. Legends tell of artists like Leonardo and Michelangelo studying human bodies to understand exactly how muscles, bones, and sinews worked. This anatomical knowledge allowed them to depict the human form with breathtaking accuracy. They could show the body in complex, dynamic poses, conveying a sense of weight, movement, and life. Compare a muscular twisting figure from Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling to a stiff columnar statue on a Gothic cathedral. The difference is astounding. One is a symbol, the other is a living, breathing being. Another key technique was the use of light and shadow, a technique known as instead of the flat, even light of Gothic painting. Renaissance masters like Caravaggio used dramatic contrasts between light and dark to model forms, create a sense of volume, and heighten the emotional drama of a scene. A single light source could illuminate a face, making it pop from a dark background, focusing the viewer's attention and creating a powerful theatrical mood. This mastery of light made their subjects feel solid and tangible, as if you could reach out and touch them. Finally, the medium itself evolved. While Gothic painters often used tempera, which dries quickly and produces a flat, matte finish, the artists of the Northern Renaissance, in particular, perfected the use of oil paint. Oil paint dries slowly, allowing artists to blend colors seamlessly, create subtle gradations of tone, and build up translucent layers or glaze. This resulted in an unprecedented richness of color, texture, and luminosity. Look at the incredible detail in a painting by Jan van Eyck gleam on a brass chandelier, the texture of a fur coat, the reflection in a mirror. This level of realism was made possible by the technical advantages of oil paint. So, let's put it all together. Gothic art is vertical, spiritual, and symbolic. It points upward, away from the imperfect earth toward a perfect heaven. Its figures are stylized, its space is flat, and its purpose is to teach and inspire devotion. It's beautiful in its own otherworldly way. Renaissance art, on the other hand, is grounded, humanistic, and realistic. It creates a window onto a world that looks and feels like our own. Even when depicting religious or mythological subjects, its figures are anatomically correct individuals with psychological depth. It uses scientific principles like perspective and a deep understanding of light to create a convincing illusion of reality. It celebrates human intellect, the beauty of the human body, and the richness of life on earth. It's not that one is better than the other. They simply had different goals born from different worldviews. The shift from Gothic to Renaissance wasn't just a change in style. It was a reflection of one of the most profound intellectual and cultural revolutions in history. It was the moment art came down from the heavens and began to walk among us on earth, showing us the beauty, drama, and potential within our own human experience. And that, fundamentally, is the rebirth that the Renaissance represents. The role of color in the works of Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael. Is it the perfect anatomy, the dramatic composition, or maybe the serene, almost divine expressions? Well, what if I told you that one of the most powerful, yet often overlooked, elements is something we see every day? Color. Tonight we're diving deep into the Italian High Renaissance, a period of artistic genius, to explore how two of its greatest titans, Leonardo da Vinci and Raphael, used color not just to decorate, but to tell stories, evoke emotion, and even define divinity itself. Forget what you think you know about old paintings being dull and faded. We're about to uncover the vibrant secrets hidden within the palettes of these masters. So, let's set the stage. The 14th to the 17th century was a time of incredible change. The Renaissance, meaning rebirth, was a rediscovery of classical Greek and Roman knowledge, art, and philosophy. Artists were no longer just craftsmen, they were intellectuals, scientists, and innovators. In Florence and Rome, the epicenters of this cultural explosion, a new way of seeing the world was emerging. Humanism placed a new emphasis on human potential and experience, and art began to reflect this. Suddenly, paintings weren't just flat, symbolic representations of religious figures. They became windows into a world that felt real, three-dimensional, and emotionally resonant. And the key to unlocking this new reality, the strategic and revolutionary use of color. Color was used to create depth, to model form, and most importantly, to breathe life into the canvas. Let's begin with the quintessential Renaissance man himself, Leonardo da Vinci. More than just a painter, Leonardo was a scientist, an inventor, and a keen observer of the natural world. This scientific curiosity deeply informed his artistic practice, especially his use of color. He wasn't just slapping paint on a canvas. He was studying how light interacts with objects and how our eyes perceive color in the distance. This led him to pioneer a technique that would change the course of art history. The word sfumato comes from the Italian for smoke, and it's the perfect description. It involves applying thin, translucent layers of paint or glazes to create incredibly soft, hazy transitions between colors and tones. There are no harsh lines or sharp outlines in a mature Leonardo painting. Everything blends seamlessly, as if you're looking through a fine mist. Now, let's see sfumato in action. Look at the Mona Lisa. Pay close attention to the corners of her mouth and the edges of her eyes. You can't pinpoint exactly where the smile begins or ends, can you? That's sfumato. Leonardo used it to create that famously enigmatic expression. He understood that ambiguity is captivating. By blurring the lines, he makes her emotions feel more complex and real. He also used this technique to create a sense of atmospheric perspective. In the background of the Mona Lisa, you'll notice the distant mountains are bluish and hazy. This wasn't a stylistic choice. It was an optical observation. Leonardo knew that as objects get farther away, the atmosphere between our eyes and the object makes it appear less distinct and bluer in color. He literally painted the air. This brings us to his masterpiece, The Last Supper. Although it has sadly deteriorated over time, his intention with color is still clear. Leonardo broke from tradition. Previous depictions of this scene were often stiff and symbolic. Leonardo, however, wanted to capture a single, dramatic moment. The instant after Jesus announces that one of his apostles will betray him, the entire composition is a ripple of human emotion shock. Denial, anger emanating from the calm, central figure of Christ. How does color play into this? Leonardo dressed Jesus in the traditional red and blue-red, symbolizing his human passion and sacrifice, and blue representing his divine nature. But look closer. The colors on the apostles are more varied and, in some cases, agitated. They create a sense of chaos and movement that contrasts with the serene stability of Jesus. Leonardo used color to choreograph the psychological drama of the scene. Now, let us shift our focus to a younger master who learned from Leonardo but forged his own distinct path. Raphael. If Leonardo was the scientist artist, Raphael was the master of harmony and grace. He absorbed the lessons of sfumato and atmospheric perspective. But his primary goal was to create images of perfect beauty, clarity, and balance. His use of color reflects this pursuit of the ideal. Raphael's colors are often purer, brighter, and more vibrant than Leonardo's. While Leonardo sought mystery in shadow, Raphael sought divinity in light and pure color. He wasn't trying to capture the ambiguity of human emotion. He was striving to represent an elevated, heavenly perfection. His paintings feel serene, ordered, and profoundly peaceful. Let's examine Raphael's Sistine Madonna. This painting is a vision of celestial beauty. The Virgin Mary and the Christ child appear on a bed of clouds, flanked by two saints. The first thing you'll notice is the color palette. Raphael employs a symphony of primary colors: bold reds, brilliant blues, and radiant yellows. These aren't the muted, earthy tones of early Renaissance art. This is a full-throated celebration of pure, saturated color. The Virgin's blue mantle is deep and rich, signifying her status as Queen of Heaven, while her red dress beneath connects to her humanity and maternal love. The golden yellow light that surrounds her isn't just background illumination. It's a divine aura, a manifestation of heavenly glory. Raphael uses color to make the divine tangible and overwhelmingly beautiful. He doesn't need misty sfumato because his figures exist in a realm of perfect clarity. Another fantastic example is Raphael's work in the Vatican, particularly the School of Athens. This fresco is a masterpiece of composition and intellectual storytelling, depicting all the great philosophers of antiquity. Color here serves an organizational purpose. Raphael groups figures using color, creating visual pathways that guide our eyes through the complex scene. The central figures, Plato and Aristotle, are given distinct colors. Plato, pointing upwards to the realm of ideal forms, wears red and purple colors, associated with ether and fire, the more abstract elements. Aristotle, gesturing down to the observable physical world, wears blue and brown, the colors of water and earth. Raphael is using color as a philosophical symbol, a visual shorthand for their opposing worldviews. It's an incredibly intelligent use of his palette to reinforce the painting's central theme. So, let's put them side by side. Leonardo and Raphael, two giants of the high Renaissance, both masters of color, yet with fundamentally different approaches. Leonardo, the introspective scientist, used color to explore the mysteries of the natural world and the human psyche. His palette is subtle, atmospheric, and full of shadow. He used sfumato to create ambiguity and depth, inviting us to look closer and question what we see. His colors are grounded in observation, capturing the way light and air truly behave. Raphael, on the other hand, was the master of divine harmony. He used color to create a vision of ideal beauty and celestial order. His palette is clear, bright, and confident. His colors are symbolic and compositional, designed to elevate the scene beyond the everyday into a realm of serene perfection. One used color to ask questions. The other used it to provide answers. In the end, their differing uses of color perfectly encapsulate their artistic personality. Leonardo's smoky, enigmatic figures draw us into a world of intellectual and psychological complexity. Raphael's vibrant, harmonious compositions lift us up into a world of divine grace and perfect beauty. Neither approach is better than the other. They are simply two different, equally brilliant paths to artistic immortality. They showed the world that color was not just for filling in outlines. In the hands of a master, color could be a tool for scientific inquiry, a vehicle for philosophical ideas, a conduit for divine light, and a key to the deepest chambers of the human heart. The next time you look at a Renaissance painting, I encourage you to look beyond the figures and the story and truly see the colors, you'll find a whole new layer of meaning waiting to be discovered. Have you ever stared at a painting from centuries ago and felt like there was a secret story hiding just beneath the surface? A story told not in words, but in symbols? Well, you're not wrong. Welcome, art lovers, to our journey back in time, to the magnificent era of the Renaissance, a period spanning from the 14th to the 17th century. This wasn't just a rebirth of art and science. It was a revolution in how stories were told on canvas. Tonight, we're going to become detectives and decode the hidden language of Renaissance painting. So, what exactly was the Renaissance? Imagine emerging from a long, dark slumber. That was Europe after the Middle Ages. There was a newfound fascination with the classical knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome, a surge in scientific discovery, and a profound shift in how people saw their place in the world. This new way of thinking, called humanism, celebrated human potential and intellect. And this intellectual explosion found its most beautiful expression in art. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael weren't just painters. They were thinkers, scientists, and storytellers. They used their incredible skills to create works that were not only breathtakingly realistic, but also packed with layers of meaning. They knew their audience, who were often highly educated and familiar with religious texts and classical mythology, would understand and appreciate these visual puzzles. Every object, every color, every gesture was often a deliberate choice, a symbol meant to convey a deeper message. Let's start with one of the most common sources of symbolism: religious stories. Take, for example, the countless depictions of the Annunciation. The moment the angel Gabriel tells the Virgin Mary she will be the mother of Jesus. Look closely. You'll often see a lily. This isn't just a pretty flower. The white lily is a powerful symbol of Mary's purity and virginity. Sometimes you might see a closed book or a scroll representing the Old Testament prophecies being fulfilled by the New Testament. In other paintings, a single ray of light streams through a window, symbolizing the divine conception. These aren't just decorative details. They're essential parts of the narrative, enriching the story for the faithful viewer. Another classic example is Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. It's more than just a depiction of Jesus' final meal with his apostles. Every element is meticulously planned. Look at Judas, the betrayer. He's shown clutching a bag of silver, the price of his betrayal. He has also knocked over a salt cellar, a common symbol of bad luck or a broken covenant. Meanwhile, Jesus is at the center, calm and serene, framed by a window that acts like a natural halo. The composition itself, with the apostles grouped in threes, creates a dynamic, emotional drama. Leonardo wasn't just painting a scene. He was capturing a moment of intense psychological and spiritual significance. But it wasn't all about religion. The Renaissance also saw the revival of classical myths and philosophy. Botticelli's Primavera is a perfect example. At first glance, it's a beautiful scene of mythological figures in a lush garden, but it's so much more. Scholars believe it's a complex allegory about love, beauty, and fertility. Drawing from Neoplatonic philosophy, the central figure isn't just Venus. She represents humanitas, or enlightened humanity, who chooses between earthly and divine love. Each figure, from the three graces to Mercury chasing away the clouds, plays a part in this intricate philosophical dance. It's a visual poem meant to be read and contemplated. Colors also had their own language. Blue, especially ultramarine blue, made from the expensive lapis lazuli stone, was often reserved for the Virgin Mary's robes signifying her status as Queen of Heaven and her purity. Red could symbolize many things depending on context: love, passion, sin, or the blood of Christ and the martyrs. Gold, of course, was the color of divinity, holiness, and heaven, often used for halos or the background of religious scenes to lift them out of the everyday world and into a spiritual realm. Even everyday objects in portraits or still life paintings held hidden meaning. This is especially true in Northern Renaissance art, from artists like Jan van Eyck. In his famous Arnolfini portrait, what looks like a simple depiction of a wealthy couple is a treasure trove of symbolism. The single lit candle in the chandelier could symbolize the presence of God. The little dog at their feet represents fidelity and loyalty. The discarded shoes suggest a sacred event is taking place on holy ground. The fruit on the windowsill might symbolize fertility or even the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. Every detail contributes to what is likely a visual contract or a commemoration of their marriage. Animals, too, played their symbolic roles. A dog, as we saw, often meant loyalty. A cat could be a sign of betrayal or deceit. The ermine, a small white weasel, was a symbol of purity and royalty, famously seen in Leonardo's Lady with an ermine. A goldfinch, often shown in the hands of the Christ child, was a symbol of his future passion, as the bird was said to feed among thorns. These weren't just random additions. They were clues for the viewer, adding layers of moral or spiritual meaning to the painting. So why did Renaissance artists rely so heavily on symbolism? For one, it was a way to communicate complex ideas to a broad audience, some of whom may not have been literate, but were fluent in this visual language. It was also a way for patrons, the wealthy families, popes, and guilds who commissioned these works to display their education, piety, and status. Owning a painting full of clever symbolism was a sign of sophistication. Most importantly, it transformed the painting from a mere depiction into a profound object of contemplation. It invited the viewer to look deeper, to think, and to engage with the artwork on an intellectual and spiritual level. Today, we might need a guidebook or a video like this one to catch all these references. But for the Renaissance viewer, this language was second nature. Looking at these masterpieces through the lens of symbolism opens up a whole new world. It allows us to connect with the past in a more intimate way, to understand the beliefs, values, and ideas that shaped this incredible period of human history. The next time you're in a museum and find yourself in front of a Renaissance painting, don't just see the figures and the colors. Look for the symbols. Look for the lily, the dog, the spilled salt, the single candle. Ask yourself, what story is this artist trying to tell me? You'll find that these centuries-old canvases are still speaking, waiting for us to listen. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the symbolic world of Renaissance art. Hope it's given you a new appreciation for these timeless masterpieces. The influence of science on painting techniques. We all know the iconic names Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, but what was the sequences that made their art so breathtakingly realistic and different from what came before? You might be surprised to learn that a huge part of the answer lies not just in the art studio, but in the science lab. Let us explore how the explosion of scientific discovery from the 14th to the 17th century completely transformed the world of painting. Before the Renaissance, medieval art was beautiful in its own right, but it was primarily symbolic. Figures often appeared flat. Backgrounds were gilded and two-dimensional, and the goal was to convey a spiritual idea, not to replicate the real world. But then, something started to shift. A new spirit of inquiry, humanism, and a fascination with the classical world of Greece and Rome took hold. Artists were no longer just craftsmen. They became thinkers, innovators, and scientists. They wanted to understand the world around them and capture its beauty and complexity on canvas. One of the biggest game changers was the study of anatomy. For centuries, the inner workings of the human body were a mystery, but Renaissance artists, driven by a desire for realism, weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. Leonardo da Vinci is the most famous example. He performed numerous dissections, meticulously sketching muscles, bones, and tendons. These weren't just morbid curiosities. They were scientific studies. This deep knowledge allowed him and his contemporaries to paint figures that looked like they could breathe and move. You can see it in the subtle tension of a muscle in Michelangelo's David or the gentle, lifelike turn of a wrist in a portrait. They weren't just painting skin, they were painting the structure beneath it, giving their subjects a weight and presence that was utterly new. But it wasn't just about what was inside the body. It was also about how we see the world. And this is where the science of optics and mathematics came into play. Have you ever looked at a Renaissance painting and felt like you could walk right into it? That incredible sense of depth is no accident. It's the result of a groundbreaking technique called linear perspective. The architect Filippo Brunelleschi is credited with formalizing this system around 1413 in Florence. By using a single vanishing point on the horizon line and organizing all objects and figures along converging diagonal lines, called orthogonals, artists could create a convincing illusion of three-dimensional space on a two-dimensional surface. It was a mathematical formula for realism. Suddenly, paintings became windows onto another world. You can see this perfectly in Raphael's masterpiece, The School of Athens, where the grand architecture recedes into the distance with perfect mathematical precision, drawing you into the gathering of great minds. Along with perspective, artists became masters of light and shadow. They moved beyond the flat, even lighting of medieval art, to explore how light actually behaves in the real world. This technique, known as schiera, which is Italian for light dark, uses strong contrasts to model forms and create a sense of volume. Artists studied how light falls on an object, creating highlights, midtones, and deep shadows. Leonardo da Vinci took this even further with a technique called sfumato, which means smoked. He created incredibly soft, hazy transitions between colors and tones, eliminating harsh outlines. Think of the mysterious smile of the Mona Lisa. That famous ambiguity is achieved through her features seem to melt into one another, giving her a lifelike quality that is still mesmerizing centuries later. This wasn't just an artistic choice. It was based on the scientific observation that objects in the distance appear less distinct and that light diffuses softly in the atmosphere. The science of color itself also underwent a revolution. The Renaissance saw the development of oil painting, which was a major technological advancement over the faster-drying egg tempera used in the medieval period. Oils allowed for a much richer, more vibrant range of colors. But more than that, artists began to study color theory. They understood how to mix pigments to create an infinite variety of hues and how to place colors next to each other to create harmony or dramatic effect. They learned that applying thin layers of translucent paint, a technique called glazing, could create a luminosity and depth of color that was impossible before. This new command of color chemistry allowed them to capture the shimmer of silk, the glow of skin, and the rich tones of a landscape with astonishing accuracy. So, when we look at a Renaissance painting, we're not just looking at a pretty picture. We are witnessing the perfect marriage of art and science. The artist's studio became a laboratory of anatomy, mathematics, optics, and chemistry. This scientific mindset is what allowed Renaissance masters to break free from the symbolic traditions of the past and create art that was a mirror to the natural world. They didn't just paint what they saw, they studied and understood it on a fundamental level. This fusion of intellectual curiosity and artistic skill is the true legacy of the Renaissance. Legacy that proved that art and science are not opposing forces, but two sides of the same coin, both striving to understand and express the profound beauty of our world. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It's incredible to see how these different fields influenced each other to create something so timeless. If you found this fascinating, please give this video a thumbs up. And do you not forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't want to miss our next exploration into the history of art. What's your favorite Renaissance painting? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. And now, let the fire take you into a world of calm and dreams.